My name's Jane Stout. I'm a professor in Trinity College Dublin and chair of the board of Natural Capital Ireland. And I'd like to talk to you today about valuing ecosystems and the species and habitats and processes within them. I'll start by giving you a bit of context on the natural capital approach and how ecosystem valuation is gaining traction globally. And then I'll focus on the pioneering work that we're doing in Ireland to develop ecosystem accounts. Now, according to the most recent review, so the recent Das Gupta review of the economics of biodiversity, which contains a whole chapter on valuing biodiversity, 6 sources of value can be recognised, and they're shown here on this slide. So first of all, we wouldn't be here without nature, without ecosystems. Humans wouldn't exist. Secondly, ecosystems contribute directly to good physical and mental health. And thirdly, related to that, natural ecosystems are a source of enjoyment, so they have amenity value, and so they contribute indirectly to our health as well. Fourthly, ecosystems provide goods and services on which we depend, and this is the aspect of the value of ecosystems that's most commonly discussed in environmental economics, the so-called use value of nature, and this is really what I'll focus on in this presentation. Fifth is knowing that a species or a place exists, even if we never see it or visit it, and this is what the economists refer to as an existence value. And sixth, nature may be sacred to us or have its own moral worth, and this is the intrinsic value of nature. So how do we capture all of these values? Well, one approach to capture the goods and services from ecosystems is to use the natural capital approach. And natural capital is an economic metaphor for nature. It's a concept that frames natural systems as stocks that provide a flow of benefits to people. And stocks include not only the living parts of ecosystems, but also the non-living parts, the geosystems, atmospheric and hydrological systems, basically the whole environment. And the flows of benefits are essential for achieving wealth and well-being. Natural capital is our life support system, and we as people depend on these goods and services. So the photograph in the background, the valley there provides food from farming, of course, but it also provides clean air, carbon storage and climate regulation. It filters pollutants, attenuates water, recycles nutrients, provides habitats for wildlife, and also opportunities for recreation and physical and mental well-being. But all of these benefits haven't traditionally been formally recognised, and the natural systems that provide them haven't been invested in. And the reason for using this language, the natural capital concept, is not to belittle the environment into a commodity, but to bring the environment into the political and economic arena where it's generally been neglected, not valued, and thus destroyed. But talking about valuing nature can be contentious. Now, when the outputs from nature have a market, then we can use the market value as a proxy of the price. We can use the market price as a proxy for value, but often the price we pay doesn't necessarily reflect the cost of production. And this is because the free services from nature aren't necessarily taken into account. So things like soil organisms or dung recyclers or the long-term damage to nature from production, like the loss of habitats or pollution of water, and the cost of restoring nature. None of these things are considered in most market prices. For the outputs from nature that don't have a market, so for example, there's no market for, say, elderflowers harvested from hedgerows or from views across lovely landscapes. For these kind of outputs from nature that don't have a market, we can use proxies. So we can ask people, we can do surveys, we can measure activity, we can ask people what kinds of landscapes they prefer to look at, or determine preferences by counting how many people go and fish in a particular stream, or how far they'll drive to do so, or how many people park in the forest car park in order to walk and admire the views. Or we could use other things like replacement costs. So for example, if we destroy a floodplain, how much will it cost to put flood defences back in, or to fix people's houses when they get flooded? But for most things, there isn't a market price and no sensible proxies. But this doesn't mean there is no value. And a key point about the natural capital concept is that the natural capital approach isn't about putting a price on nature, it's about valuing nature. And even though when you Google the word capital, the first 4 images you see are these 4, all to do with money, Valuing ecosystems and valuing nature doesn't have to include monetary values. Now, pricing and valuing may seem like the same thing, but value and price aren't the same. Value implies the worth of a good or service for an individual, whereas price is the amount of money paid by the buyer to the seller in exchange for a product or service. Prices can be arbitrary and they can be context specific. And values can be inherently, well, they are inherently anthropocentric, and they can be subjective. So each person may be prepared to pay a different amount or may value parts of an ecosystem in a different way. So it's very hard and sometimes impossible to put true financial values on ecosystems. So why do we often see the value of nature converted to monetary forms? So for example, on this infographic here, well, one of the reasons is that it can draw attention to the importance of nature to people, and economic valuations can really help to reveal the scale of the problem in a metric that everyone understands, money. It's not everything, but financial valuation can complement and strengthen ethical or scientific arguments, not necessarily substitute them, but strengthen them. And it can allow for appropriate financial payments, for compensation, cost-benefit analyses, financial and other supports for conservation of ecosystems. But it is only one way to value nature. The need to value nature has been recognised at global, EU and national level. So for example, the UN SDG 15 talks about integrating ecosystem values into planning and development, into poverty reduction strategies and international accounts. And the indicator for progress on this goal is implementing and reporting on the SIA, and I'll come back to what that is in a moment. The European Green Deal states that all EU policies should preserve and restore nature, and the EU Biodiversity Strategy to 2030 highlights that integration of the value of nature is a key element of its strategy to restore biodiversity. And at the national level, our National Biodiversity Action Plan includes an action to develop natural capital accounts in Ireland. And the EPA's own assessment of Ireland's environment in 2020 highlighted the need to value our natural environment for our economies, for societal health and well-being. So how can we value nature in practice? Well, one way is through natural capital accounting. And this is a systematic way to measure and report on the assets and benefits from natural capital, these stocks and flows. Countries all around the world prepare national accounts to give measures like GDP and national expenditure and use this long established system of national accounts. It's a standard that ensures comparability across metrics and across countries. But things like GDP aren't always useful. So GDP is bounded by the economy, not by the limits of the environment. And it's not a measure of welfare. It wasn't designed for that. It also only looks at output, not at long-term income or wealth or stocks underpinning this output, including natural capital and its degradation. So for example, in forestry, timber resources outputs are counted, but forest carbon sequestration isn't. And other services like water regulation by forests are also hidden. So what natural capital accounts can do is to encompass the underlying stocks as well as the flows of benefits and services. And you might want to have a look at this little video that I've put on the screen here. It's an explainer on ecosystem services that we produced through Natural Capital Ireland and the InCase project. Now, natural capital accounting isn't a new approach. It's been in development since the early 90s. So the calls for environmental accounts to align with the system of national accounts at the 1992 Rio Earth Summit. And the importance of valuing and accounting for nature is reflected in SDG 15, as I mentioned earlier, but it's also, natural capital is crucial for delivering lots of the other SDGs. Following the Rio Earth Summit, the UN and others developed the System of Environmental Economic Accounting, the SEEA that I mentioned earlier, which extended the boundary of the system of national accounts. And the SEEA is the accepted international standard for environmental economic accounting. And since the early 90s, it's developed with inputs from a range of interdisciplinary experts. So going beyond the statisticians to economists, ecologists, geographers, and other natural scientists. And the UN SEA ecosystem accounts provide us with a way to bring natural systems together. So whereas aspects of the SEA central framework have been adopted in the EU since 2011, a spatially explicit ecosystem-bound approach to SEA ecosystem accounting was accepted as a statistical standard in March this year. So it's really cutting edge. And what it does is considers how individual environmental assets interact as part of a natural process within a given spatial area. So it's basically a systems approach. It's spatially explicit and is particularly useful for planners, authorities, land managers to view changes in their ecosystems and what they deliver over time. There are also natural capital accounting methods developed for corporates to provide information pertinent to business managers, to inform business operations, and one of the leading approaches is the Natural Capital Protocol from the Capitals Coalition. So there are lots of resources covering the history and development of natural capital accounting, including documents produced by ourselves and by the Capitals Coalition. But the bottom line is that the SEA ecosystem accounting approach is emerging as the international standard for natural capital or ecosystem accounting. And it encompasses living and non-living components of ecosystems and allows us to bring all of these systems together. And this is what I'm going to focus on now. So the SEA ecosystem accounting model, as I said, it's the statistical framework for organizing biophysical data. So information on extent and condition of assets or stocks, as shown in the left-hand side of this slide, and flows of ecosystem services and benefits for people on the right-hand side. And what this does is allows tracking change in ecosystems and their condition over time and linking this explicitly to economic and other human activities. And at each of these steps, you can create accounts. And it's this SEA ecosystem accounting approach that we're using in the InCase project. This is this interdisciplinary EPA-funded project with myself and Catherine Farrell, Mary Kelly Quinn and Lisa Coleman at Trinity and UCD, Stephen and Danny in University of Limerick and Carl over in NUI Galway. We're also very much working closely with the natural capital experts at Natural Capital Ireland and SEA ecosystem accounts experts, basically the guys who developed these systems in Australia, Carl Obst and Mark Eigenman. And what we're doing is testing the development of SEA ecosystem accounts at catchment level in 4 contrasting subcatchments across Ireland. And key to understanding the flows of services and benefits that come from ecosystems are understanding the underlying stocks, so the extent and condition of natural capital assets. So this is where we start. And apologies, there's a lot on this slide. But what we have on the left-hand side there is one of our subcatchments. This is the Dargle subcatchment. And this is the land cover and water bodies shown according to Careen. So we've created these maps detailing all the different land use, land cover types in the different subcatchments. And what we can do is we can use this to build an extent account that looks at how these different ecosystem types vary in terms of their extent over time. And so the table on the right shows the percentage area of the subcatchment of these different ecosystem types, and you can track change over time. So rather than looking at a single ecosystem or habitat and making decisions, you can look across all of them and see trade-offs when habitats are converted to other uses and track changes over time. Now, Careen loses a lot of detail because of the resolution of the mapping units. So what we've done in the InCase project is actually layer up all the other available data sets to make more detailed extent accounts. But hopefully when the OSI EPA land cover map is ready, this should be relatively straightforward to do in the future. Once we know the extent of a particular asset, we can start to look at its condition. So we can create condition accounts. So here for freshwater assets across the Dargle subcatchment, we can look at condition using indicators. So for example, pressures and risks from the Water Framework Directive reporting. And this is really useful indicators for looking at the freshwater system. But in fact, condition indicators are not readily available for most asset, so habitat or ecosystem types. And this is really one of the big gaps in generating condition accounts at scale in Ireland. And of course, condition is really important. It links the ability of a particular ecosystem to provide the services. So for example, in peatlands, if they're in poor condition, then they're not going to be storing carbon, they're actually going to be emitting carbon. Then we move to services, so accounts of the services being provided by an area. And in the In-Case project, we're focusing on 8 or 9 relevant services in terms of provisioning, regulating and cultural services from these subcatchments. And services are the outputs from nature that have benefits to humans. So they're only relevant in a human context. So if somebody actually uses them. So we can create supply and use tables. And this is where the work with the economists is so important. So we can determine what's influencing supply and use and then go to the next steps of quantifying benefits. So what we've got here in this table is for an example of a kind of a logic chain for forests. And what we can see if we work across the table from the left-hand side, we can see that both ecological and human factors determine the supply or the extent and type of forests. And the use of forests are affected by things like policy as well as market forces, so supply and demand for timber. And then in the central column there highlighted in red, one of the key services that forests provide are in terms of climate regulation. And we can measure this in terms of soil organic carbon, biomass, extent and type of forest and emissions factors. And then on the right-hand side, we can see the benefits in terms of improved climate, and the people that benefit are the users at local, regional and global scale. So that's the way that we construct these service flows and look at benefits and beneficiaries in the SEER framework. But as with the condition data, getting data on services and linking services explicitly to ecosystems and ecosystem condition and on the one side and to benefits on the other side is challenging. And the whole process is very data hungry. So we really need good engagement across sectors with a huge range of ecosystem experts and data providers. Environmental data are very fragmented, often not aligned, and there's an awful lot of work to process the data as well as to get hold of it in the first place. But also because this process is all about linking ecosystems to benefits and to people, we need to engage with the beneficiaries as well. So the people on the ground who are users of these services. And to that end, we put a lot of effort into stakeholder engagement through the In-Case project, and we're actually holding focused stakeholder workshops with each catchment this week. The benefit of natural capital accounting is that it provides a holistic approach to environmental management and protection. So we're not looking at ecosystems in isolation. We're considering soil, water, living things, farm systems, all in one process. And we can link those then to core issues like maintaining water quality, climate, biodiversity, health, and well-being. So the applications of natural capital accounting and generating environmental economic accounts in this way is that nature can be integrated into decision making, and whether that's for the European Green Deal, linking with national accounts, linking across sectoral environmental policies, or whether it's an individual business level or developing financing projects, payment for ecosystem services, etc. There's lots of applications. So in summary, there are multiple values of ecosystems. It's quite complex, but we can use methods like natural capital accounting to highlight what benefits we derive from ecosystems and how those can change over time with changes in management. And the great thing about the natural capital accounting approach is that it's holistic. We're not looking at environmental issues or ecosystems in isolation. The approach brings the different systems, the soil, the water, the living things, all into one process, and we can link with key environmental issues. It's relatively straightforward. It makes good sense. We already account for so much, but it's putting this into a systematic framework and how we can link our environmental assets with our economy. There are certainly challenges in terms of data availability, accessibility, resolution, spatial and temporal alignment, getting data over time, etc. And as I said before, challenges with regards to condition, services and benefits. But there are also huge opportunities where we are obliged to do this under global and national policy. businesses and other government departments are already embracing this. We don't have all the answers yet. In Case Project and more broadly Natural Capital Ireland are developing capacity and expertise, but it really is something that's at the forefront internationally. It is cutting edge stuff. And because it's holistic and brings together all these different elements, brings together disciplines and stakeholders, it's very helpful and is one way to make evidence and data-driven informed decisions. Thank you very much.